I'd like to now introduce our featured speaker, who is Kenyatta Brame. He is the Executive Vice President of Cascade Engineering. He joined Cascade in 2006 and has been crucial in leading several of Cascade Engineers' Employer of Choice initiatives, including the B Corp certification, and being designated a full partner for the Partners for a Racism-Free Community. Before he joined Cascade Engineering, he was the Senior Vice President for Operations and Merchandising at Cisco Food Services here in Grand Rapids. And he also served as a practicing attorney for Miller Johnson, Snell, and Kaminsky. He is also an adjunct professor at the Thomas Cooley Law School. He was raised in Grand Rapids, and he holds numerous degrees, including his law degree from the University of Michigan, a master's degree from Michigan State University, and a bachelor's degree from Wabash College. And he has also studied abroad at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. So please welcome Kenyatta.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. People noticed that I went to both state and Michigan, so they go, who do you cheer for? And I always say, go blue. So I went there first. So I don't hate state, but I cheer blue. First of all, let me start off by saying thank you to the forum for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be here. Also like to thank Sharon Darby, who was a member of the forum, for making the connection, and then John Longchamp for helping me put this great presentation together. So let me start off by talking about Cascade Engineering. So Cascade Engineering is a manufacturer here in Grand Rapids. And one of my goals as Executive Vice President of Cascade Engineering is to make sure that we promote manufacturing in our area. Right? So when I go to high schools and I talk about manufacturing, I look at these kids' face and they just give me a blank stare. Why would I ever want to go into manufacturing? So one of my goals is to make manufacturing sexy again, right? So when I'm going to these schools, they're excited about it, right? Because a lot of times these students don't realize that a career in manufacturing could be in IT, it could be law, it could be marketing, it could be a billion different things, right? So they have this one notion in their head. And one of the things that I think that we need to do better as a business community is to use the community college, right? So I have a meeting coming up with Dr. Pink to talk about what can we do as a business to make sure that we're preparing for this next generation, right? And so we have this opportunity to make sure that our people are trained and prepared, because right now we've got a cliff. So we've got a whole lot of employees that are in their 50s, right? Their late 50s. So over the next 10 years, a large part of our population is going to be retiring, right? We all want to get to that point where we can retire. So they're going to be retiring, but particularly in our maintenance and our technical areas, we don't have that next level of generation, that next generation ready to take on those positions. So we need to start doing something now to make sure that can happen. And that's one of the ways the community college can really help us with that. And so Cascade Engineering is, as I indicated, international manufacturer. We've got 9 different business units. We're involved in all different kinds of industries: agriculture, automotive, furniture, RFID. So we're unique in the sense that we touch a lot of different areas, and that's what makes Cascade Engineering exciting to work for. But we have 9 different businesses. A lot of our businesses are here located in Grand Rapids. Someone talked about us being B certified. We're a B certified corporation here in Michigan. And we've got facilities in Texas, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, and we've got facilities also in Europe, in Eastern Europe. Every once in a while I get to go visit our employees in Budapest, and that's a nice trip. That's my wife over there. I promised her a trip to Europe, so I got to figure out how to get her over there. That's one way to do it on the cheap. But today, I want to spend most of my time talking about TBL. And when I give this speech, most of the time I say, anyone heard of TBL? And the crowd gives me this blank look. They have no idea what TBL is. So this is a little more like preaching to the choir, so I'm excited about that. But the way we define TBL is obviously people, planet, and profit. And you guys are all familiar with that. So when I was in school, we learned Friedman. Everybody remember Friedman? The purpose of a business is to do what? Maximize profits for shareholders. Right? And if you're not doing that, you're pretty much stealing from the company. And one of the best things about working for Cascade Engineering is that we don't believe that, right? We believe that the environment and the planet and people are as equally as important as the profits. But we also, because we are a business, we understand that making money is important, right? You can't do the other two if your doors are closed, right? But it's about balancing those three things, right? And we're not saying that we have it right. Sometimes we go one way or the other too much, but we always try to get back into balance. And because Fred Keller started this business in 1973 with the notion of wanting to have a business that treated people with dignity and respect and still made money, that's been one of our founding principles, right? And so that's how this TBL sort of wraps those notions together. And we're excited about that. And so since 2003, we've been transparent about what we're trying to do, right? One of the notions of being a TBL organization is being transparent to your stakeholders, right? And that means our community and also to our employees. So every year we produce this report, simply called the TBL report, and we share this with our community. And it talks about all the things that we're striving for in the three different categories: people, planet, and profit. And if you want to see our current report is for 2015. If you want to see that report, you can go to this website here and look that up and try to understand what are the things that are driving our business. So at Cascade Engineering, we think that business can have a huge impact on communities, right? And we want to be more than just a maker of trash cans or car parts, right? So when I wake up in the morning, I don't get excited about that blue trash can I just made for the city of Grand Rapids, right? I get excited about making an impact in my community, right? I'm very proud of Cascade Engineering. When I tell people I work at Cascade Engineering, they say, hey, I've heard great things about you guys. Often they have no idea what we do, what we make, but they know that we're strong on our people components, right? We work with our community to try to break down barriers. I'm gonna talk about barriers in a little bit. So what problems have we tried to solve at Cascade Engineering? So this is a list of all the problems in the world that we see, right? And this page could be filled. This page could have a billion different things on it. But unlike other businesses, we believe that we should be trying to address some of these issues, right? We as a business can make a difference, right? I often get questions from other executives about why are you trying to address this issue? Why is that important to you? Well, it's important to us because we are a TBL organization. So what are some of the issues that we have identified in our community, right? We see employment discrimination. We see issues of poverty. We see issues of greed and unsafe water and pollution and racism and racial misunderstanding and racial miscommunication, right? When I started showing this presentation many years ago, that slide, I had the unsafe water. Typically, we've done projects in Haiti and Honduras and Ghana, and I've traveled all over the world to install water filters. And it's sort of ironic now that Michigan is known for having unsafe drinking water. So it's even in our own backyard, and that's something that we continue to address. And so, what are some of our solutions? I'm going to talk about a few of those. So the ones in yellow I'll hit today. So I'm talking about returning citizens. I'm going to talk about welfare to career. I'm going to talk about anti-racism. I'm going to talk about dialogue and the Young Professionals of Color Conference. So before I dive into these, we've got another half an hour or so. I want to make sure that this is just not me talking to you for the next 30 minutes. If you have a question, raise your hand. Some of you I know, I may call on you. The old professor can come out of me and say, hey, you have a question? But seriously, if you have a question, ask a question. Let's make sure that this is a two-way communication. So let's start off with returning citizens. So the first thing is that, some people say, well, what are returning citizens? As a leader, I found that when you have conversations about felons, it's a different conversation, right? No one wants to help felons, right? They have all these ex-cons. They have all these names for these individuals that are coming back to our community. And we understand that by terming them returning citizens, understanding that the thousands of people coming back to our community every year, and if they don't have opportunities, the likelihood of them going back to prison is significant, right? This is one of the very few areas where I find that people will tell me to my face that, you know what, we don't hire felons, right? They have no concept of the EEOC guidelines that they're actually violating the law. So the lawyer comes out to me and says, you shouldn't say that. Shh, you shouldn't say that. They go, well, why can't I say that? Well, because there are guidelines that indicate that you can't have these rules that you would not consider anybody with a criminal background. In part because they often have disparate impacts, right? So certain communities, particularly people of color, are more likely to have criminal records. And so what you could say is that we're not going to hire people with criminal records, and what you end up doing is disproportionately eliminating people of color from your employment pools. So that's why the EEOC has these guidelines. And so in a minute, I'll talk about some of the guidelines that we at Cascade Engineering use. Another thing that we've done is that we've moved the box, right? Many of you have filled out applications where one of the first questions they ask you is, have you ever been convicted of a crime, or have you ever been convicted of a misdemeanor, or have you ever been arrested? By the way, those are all inappropriate questions. The appropriate question is that you can legally ask is, have you ever been convicted of a felony, right? And a lot of companies use that box as a filter. So an employee of mine was telling me that he and his brother had gone and applied for jobs, and he left, and his brother had forgotten his phone, and he came back, and the brother had a felony, and he could see that that employer looked at that box and balled up the application and threw it right in the trash, right? And it made him so mad because, his brother was a good guy. He had made a mistake many years ago, but because of that, he wasn't going to get that opportunity. So what we've done at Cascade Engineering is that we've moved that box. And so that question is no longer on our initial application, right? So we make a determination whether we like you or not, and then we ask those questions, all right? And also what we've done at Cascade Engineering is that we've determined that often when you require our mid-level managers to make that decision, given the choice, they will often choose the person without the criminal record because they think that it might be a reflection on them if something goes wrong, right? These are smart people. They go, let me reduce some of my risk. So I'm not going to choose this person. In some cases, they choose the less qualified person rather than a person with a criminal record. Working with the community college, there have been many programs where individuals have come through training and couldn't get jobs because of criminal record. So we have a shortage of technical expertise in this area in Western Michigan. There are many jobs that go unfilled, yet there may be a person that's qualified that won't get an opportunity because of his or her criminal record. And that's something that we need to rectify. So one of the things we're doing is a program called 30-2-2. Right? Our goal is to have 30 companies hire 2 individuals and track them for 2 years, right? So we tell all these stories about, the great success stories, but a lot of that goes toward the heart, right? Goes to the heart of the argument. And so I can tell a great story. I'm going to show you a video in a second about an individual who we've hired that's his career has rocketed at Cascade Engineering. I can tell that story, right? And if you are leading with the heart, that makes sense to you, right? But if you're leaning with the mind, saying, you know what, I need some stats. Cascade Engineering never really tracked our success of these individuals. Our logic was, once they got hired, we want to treat them like everybody else. So someone could say, hey, Kenyatta, what's their turnover rate? And I'd have to say, I don't know, right? And so I wasn't able to convince that group. So now with this 30-2-2 program, we're going to be able to track that information so that when I'm asked that question, we can say, this group hopefully has the same retention rate as the rest of the population, or even, like I work for the career, its population's retention rate is actually higher than the normal population, right? That will allow people to hopefully get involved in these programs because you've reduced some of the risk. Particularly in manufacturing, there's very little risk in hiring individuals. If you're not working in a school or in a financial institution or in a hospital or some retirement homes, there are very few regulations about who you can hire. And so at Cascade Engineering, as a manufacturer, we have the opportunity to be able to keep an open mind and allow individuals with different type of backgrounds to work at Cascade Engineering. So with that, let me show you this video that sort of describes one of the many stories we have at Cascade Engineering about an individual with a criminal background and what he's done with us.
Why should we give somebody that's been in prison a second chance? This person is still a part of the community at large. And I think that you have to look in and say that this person will continue to be a part of our community. Why not give them a second chance? I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, started my elementary school here, middle school, and high school. At the age of 18, I was incarcerated. I would spend the next 19 years in prison. As I was approaching parole, I was very determined to beat the odds. And so everything that I did was calculated from the point that I'm not going to be a statistic. I knew that I was going to be a worker for Cascade Engineering. That was my dream. The first day at Cascade, I felt as though I had arrived. I was willing to do any work because this company had given me a second chance, knowing that most employers would not even look at a person with a criminal background. So it rooted a sense of loyalty to me, to this company. I was promoted to a supervisor within a year, and I was recently promoted to a lean manufacturing manager. Success is when potential meets opportunity. And so now my potential is to grow. So when the next opportunity comes around, it's successful. To my knowledge, there has never been an African-American director in operations. And so I want to be the first African-American director of operations.
Oh, I think you said you wanted my job.
Yes, but now I've been granted the ability to go into the juvenile systems and talk to the young men about their course, their life course, and redirect their life, and change their journey. And Cascade puts its stamp of approval on that.
So that is a great story that goes to the heart, right? You hear about Jay's story and you say, you know what? Perhaps I need to give somebody an opportunity and they can be successful, right? And now in combination with that, our 32 program hopefully will have us with some stats. So if you're not moved by the heart, some statistics will help you understand why this is important. This is one of those things that both the left and the right support, Republicans and Democrats support, because in the end, hopefully we're keeping people out of prison. We spend $30,000 a year on every individual that goes to prison, right? If we're able to keep those individuals out of our prison systems, that's money back to the taxpayers of this state. And that's a win-win for everybody, right? So that's one of our goals. So another program I'd like to spend some time talking about is our Welfare to Career program. This is probably the program that we're probably most known for, right? And so in this situation, what we've been able to do is take individuals that have been involved in generational poverty, right, and provide them opportunities. And so people often, I get a call from somebody saying, hey, Kenyatta, we heard about this Welfare to Career program. How do we replicate it, right? How do we do that? And the first thing I talk about with them is it's about your culture. We started this thing in 1999, and we had many, many failures. One of the cool things about working for Cascade Engineering is that we're not afraid to fail, right? And a failure doesn't mean the program automatically stops. It means that we perhaps have to try again. And so we tried multiple times. The first group we brought in, our concept was that if you just give somebody a job, they can be successful, right? So the individuals came to work, and talking to my supervisors now, the culture probably wasn't that welcoming. They had their own stereotypes about who these individuals were and why they were there. And within the first month, they were all gone, right? They were all gone. And so we had to look at ourselves. And so it's not only a situation where you have to train the individuals coming out of generational poverty how to be successful in this type of work environment, you also have to change your own culture to be accepting of these individuals, right? It's a two-way street. And one thing we've learned about this is that once we have that type of culture, it benefits everybody. A culture where there's understanding and appreciation of differences and diversity, everyone's able to be successful in that culture, right? So one of the things we did afterwards is that, one of the things that probably made the program most successful is that we actually hired a DHS worker. I think it's called DHHS now. And we brought this individual in, and she actually sat at Cascade Engineering, right? And we allowed her to be in our system. So this is a great public-private partnership, where this individual was able to look into the records at CE and solve problems before they became problems. So, for example, if Kenyatta was not at work one day, she could look into that, she'd get a report, and she'd call me that day and say, hey, Kenyatta, what's going on? How come you were absent without an excuse, right? The most common reason people get terminated for is what? Attendance, right? And it may be a childcare issue. It may be a transportation issue. It could be a billion different issues. And her name is Joyce. Joyce can ask questions that I, as an employer, can't ask, right? And she's able to solve problems because she can dive into those questions and get results. She has access to state funds. She has access to private monies. And so what we were able to do is, by partnering together, having that additional resource, these individuals we can meet them before they were in too much trouble. Before they got 9 points and were termed, we can catch them at that first absence. And it made a huge difference. And so after that, we actually hired another woman. Her name is actually Joyce too, so our two Joyces. And she worked for the individuals that were not receiving state benefits, but were at that next level that still needed support, right? Often there's something called a cliff, where individuals, if you start making more money, they cut off other benefits. So you may receive X dollars in child support, you make $1 extra an hour, and all of a sudden your child support is gone, and your additional $1 an hour doesn't cover for what you've lost in child support, right? And so people say, hey, these individuals are lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want these promotions. No, in many cases, they can do the math, right? And so that situation, that's something that Michigan has done a good job of trying to eliminate that in different areas. And because we had that GHS worker on site, we can create long-term plans that allow people to get there. This year, I was able to go down to the Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C. and testify. And I was able to tell the story of Amy Valderas. And Amy Valderas was a young woman who was able to come off welfare. Joyce from DHS referred her to us. We're able to provide her an opportunity to provide her a career. And then 17 years later, she's a leader in the organization, right? Her children have graduated from college. She owns her own house. And so she's an amazing success story, right? And we've got a lot of stories like that. Right now, we've got about 300 people that work, our operators at Cascade Engineering, and we've got over 50 of them that started off on welfare who are no longer on welfare. That's a great, great story. We're proud about that. So we want to make sure that those stories continue. And so once again, going down to Washington, D.C., and we're able to tell that story, and we were supported by both Democrats and Republicans. Jennifer Granholm came to Cascade Engineering to talk about this program. The current governor came to Cascade to talk about this program. So when you have hopefully a good program, you can get support from both sides of the aisle. And that 98% retention, that's a great number for us, because when we look at DHS's other retention numbers, we're almost double what they see in other companies, right, and other individuals, right? So we believe that when you provide somebody with resources and a supportive culture, they can be successful. And that's what that goal is. All right. And so now we're going to dive into another subject at Cascade Engineering. And this is what I get a lot of questions about. Why do you guys talk about race? What's up with that? That's sort of awkward, isn't it? Oh, yeah. It can be awkward. It can be difficult. But we were certified as an anti-racism organization about 4 years ago. We go through that audit every couple of years. Sharon Darby does a lot of great work with that. And we want to talk about race because we understand it impacts our community, it impacts our lives, and it's something that we need to talk about in order to get beyond where we are now. I often joke that I spend more time with the people at work than I do with my own wife, right? And so if I'm spending more time at work than I do at home, I want to be able to talk about things that are important to me as an individual. And actually, race and the impact it has on our community is one of those things. So one of the things that we did about 5 years ago, this was through the leadership of Fred Keller, we set off on an anti-racism journey, right? So if you read this statement does not say that we have all the answers. It does not say that we're perfect. It does not say that we've eliminated racism. But what it does say is that when we find difficult situations, we will talk about them, right? When we find difficult situations, we will challenge ourselves, right? When we find difficult situations, we have the courage to come together as a group and have these tough, awkward situations. I've had many people come into my office and close the door and say, Kenyatta, let me ask you this, right? And sometimes I get the strangest, weirdest questions, right? I'm thinking, how would you ever think that? Or why would you believe that? But because of the environment that we have, they have the courage to ask that question, and I have the courage to answer that question, right? And so that person walked away with a different understanding of race because of that conversation, right? Had we not had that conversation, he would have had that same belief, right? And that may have colored what he saw on the news. It may have colored what he tells his children. It may have colored how he treats his co-employee, right? So by breaking down some of these walls, we're able to move the dialogue along. And I often give Fred Keller a lot of credit for having these conversations, because he often indicates that, you know, as a white man in this area, he doesn't have to do this, right? You know, he often indicates that, you know, he can go home and not worry about issues of race, but he chooses to do so. And I give him a lot of credit for doing that. He also has just had the courage to talk about some experiences in his own life, right? Where he says that, you know what, I'm not happy that this happened this way, or I'm not proud of this moment. And so when you have your leader, the leader of the organization, the owner of the organization, having these kind of frank conversations with employees, right? He's not up there saying, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. I've done all these things, be like me. He's saying that I am imperfect. I've had difficulties in my life. I want to recognize them, but I want to have this conversation so we can move ahead. And he inspires other people, right? That's leadership, right? One thing at Cascade Engineering we find is that leaders are able to make themselves vulnerable, right? And that's hard to do, right? I went to law school, and that's not what they teach you in law school. They say weakness, any sign of weakness will cause you to lose, but that's not the case in these conversations, right? So having a leader that's able to do that allows us to move this conversation along. And so we talk about some important issues. One of the issues that we've talked about, and this conversation started last year with Ferguson, those were tough conversations. And so we have something called dialogue. So dialogue is a way of getting to issues and way of communicating concerns. So we get a group of people together, we literally sit in a circle, and then we have a conversation. So the question for this dialogue was, could Ferguson happen in Grand Rapids, right? Now I could probably say, could Dallas happen in Grand Rapids? Or could the incident in Ohio or Florida or New York or Minnesota or Baton Rouge, could they happen in Grand Rapids? And so what was interesting about these conversations was that you know, you had half the room said, you know what, this could never happen in Grand Rapids, right? And you have the other half of the room saying, oh, it could happen tonight, right? And so the purpose of dialogue is not to convince the other side that you're right or they're wrong. The purpose of dialogue is to increase your understanding, right? So if I think one thing can happen, it's probably because I'm using my own perspective, right? I'm using my own experiences. So in my experience, this couldn't happen. Whereas another individual, from their experience, it could happen. So after having this conversation, at least both sides understand why they feel or think this way, right? And that's very impactful as an organization, right? So in this scenario, we had executives, we had managers, we had hourly people all coming together to talk about something that's tough, right? And so that's something that I encourage at Cascade Engineering, and we're very proud that we can have these conversations. But once again, we're not saying that we're perfect. We're not saying that we don't have strife, we don't have concerns, we don't have conflicts. But what we're saying is that when we get to these points, we have a mechanism that allows us to discuss them, right? And I think that's one of the things that makes Cascade Engineering successful. And so, you know, some of this dialogue has been about, you know, the concept of being colorblind versus focusing on race. So I often hear say, you know what, Kenyatta, I'm colorblind. I don't see your color. And they often quote Martin Luther King. I think they're quoting him wrong, in the sense that, in this quote, he talks about a person not being judged by their color, not that you don't see their color. Because me, as a person from African descent, that's very much part of who I am, right? And so if you say you don't see that, I'm saying that you can't see or know me, because once again, that's a very strong part of who I am and what I am, right? And often I also think that we talk about, being in a colorblind society, that the minorities, well, technically we're not minorities anymore, but these small groups of people get dismissed, right? So we have this image of what America is, and it's often not people of color. It's often not people of African descent. It's often not Latinos, right? And so by using the notion of colorblindness, I think that we weaken the strength that we have and all the diversity that we have, right? So we are all Americans, but being a person of color, my America is slightly different than a person from a different racial group or different economic class or a bunch of different things. So I think that we want to recognize these differences, and those are my beautiful children. So, and so last week I was in the woods. I have a group of Boy Scouts. I started a troop in Grand Rapids because when I grew up, every school in GRPS had Boy Scouts. It was just from Cub Scouts to every school had them. Now that's not the case, unfortunately. Boy Scouts was something that I think helped me to become the man that I am today. I really appreciated what it did for me. The camping, the fishing, the leadership, all these things. And so when my son became in first grade, I said, you know what? That was a good time for me. Let's go find a troop in Grand Rapids. And there were no troops, and there were no groups of Boy Scouts for African American or Latino boys. And so what my wife and I did was we started a troop in Grand Rapids. And so we've got about 25 Cub Scouts and about 15 Boy Scouts. And actually it's a racially diverse group, but it's giving an opportunity to inner city kids that they wouldn't get. And I think that one of our goals as individuals in the community is try to make sure that we provide opportunities for people who may not have them. And this is a great way to do that. So getting back to this, so we're in the woods, camping with the Boy Scouts. So I just got back this weekend. So all the things that happened last week, didn't hear about it, didn't see it. I came back and I was like, what in the world has happened in a week? My God. And listening to talk radio, I often hear that individuals talk about, Black Lives Matters, why that shouldn't exist, or Blue Lives Matters, or why that shouldn't exist. And my point of this slide is that they both can exist together, right? Often we hear that if you support one, you can't support the other. And I don't believe that. I personally don't believe that, right? So that you can say at one sentence, you know what? I understand that there is a systematic problem with African-American men being killed. Boom. So let's dive deep into that. In the same token, responding with violence is unacceptable, right? I understand that police have a job to do, and they should not be persecuted for the job that they're doing. Blue lives matter, right? And so I can hold those two different thoughts at the same time and support both of these notions, right? And I think that sometimes that when we have conversations of race, it's either one or the other, right? So I watch TV, I watch the news, you don't have anybody talking about supporting both these groups or both these concepts, right? You get one or the other. And that's something that I think that dialogue, having the community come together and discuss these things will allow us to do. Because if you don't have these discussions, how do you get to the next level? How do you move ahead? If the only people that you're talking to are the people who believe what you believe in, how are you going to grow as an individual? And so those are two of the scouts. And so we came back to town, and all of a sudden their cell phones start working, and they could get all this communication where we couldn't get in the woods. And one of the boys asked me, they call me Scoutmaster or Mr. Kenyatta, you know what? Why do they keep killing us? What can I do to stay alive? And I'm like, dang, you know what? That's a tough question for a little kid to answer, right? To answer to a little kid, right? And to be honest, when I was their age, I wasn't thinking about those type of issues, right? I was fortunate that I grew up in the time that I did. And so I have a conversation with them, you look them in the eye and you say, you know what? First thing you do is you obey all the laws, right? And if you ever get stopped by a police officer, be respectful, right? If you ever get stopped by a police officer and you're in a car, keep your hands on the wheels, or if you're on the street, show the cop your hands, no fast motions. Do all these things because our goal is that, after this encounter that you're still alive, right? But in back of my mind, I think that there are certain situations where all those things have happened and the individual still ended up dead, right? And so these are tough questions to ask for an 11-year-old to think about, right? But if we as a community don't start having dialogue about these issues, we won't get beyond the things that we see on social media and the 5-second comments on the news, right? We got to be able to have deeper conversations about that. We've had over 500 people killed this year by police, right? So what is the systemic cause of that? What can we do to break that down? We should be having conversations about that rather than saying that, you know what, Blue Lives Matter or necessarily Black Lives Matters. We need to be able to break that down, discuss what the true issue is. And that's what I believe as an organization, Cascade Engineering is able to have some of those conversations. Hopefully we can bring this to other business and other individuals. And if we could be a way to bring people together to have these conversations, that will help us have the kind of impact we want to have in our community. And so, you know, what are the things that you can talk about at your organization, right? So one of the things we put in the box is race. At your organization, what are the tough things you can put in in the line? What are the things you can put on the line, right? It could be sexism. It could be a billion different things, but the point of this is that you want to have an organization that allows you to talk about tough situations, tough topics. You want to have an organization that allows you to express yourself and who you are. You want to be part of an organization where hopefully dialogue can continue rather than people retreating to their own corners. So one of the things we've asked ourselves is, you know what can we do to have more people of color be in leadership positions? And so one thing we've done at Cascade Engineering is that we've started the Young People of Color Conference. We've had it for 5 years. And what we do is that we bring international and national speakers to Grand Rapids, and we have local speakers. Because when I'm 46 now, when I was in my 20s, when I was a young professional, there were a lot of my classmates. So everybody I went to high school, you know, they left Grand Rapids and say, you know what, Grand Rapids is not for me. Right? So it's a whole generation of, well, a lot of the 80s people are gone because they didn't think Grand Rapids had something for them. I think that a community that is able to support its young professionals of color is a vibrant community, right? And so we want to make sure that as a business, right, I want to make sure that everybody feels they have an opportunity because that way we all can grow, we all can be successful. And so once again, when I was at that age, a lot of my friends didn't come back. And so we have this conference now. It's an amazing conference where we've got all these people coming together to discuss what are the skills and tools they need to be successful in Grand Rapids, right? What can you do to help navigate the corporate culture as a person of color? And hopefully, you know, we'll have a CEO, an EVP, a CFO out of this group because we've indicated that business supports diversity. We believe it drives our innovation. We want these individuals to stay. We want to have a vibrant community, and we want everyone to be successful. It's one of those situations where when the water rises, it can rise for everybody. So this is one of the small things that we do to try to encourage people to be in Grand Rapids and stay in Grand Rapids. And this is Yasi Ross. He is from the Blackfeet tribe in Montana and in Washington, and he came on as our international speaker today. He had a fascinating story about growing up on the reservation, the perseverance it took for him to get to where he did. He said at one point he had a GPA of 0.7. And he says, how do you get a 0.7, right? He went to 6 different colleges, but he ended up graduating from Columbia Law School. So it's it's a story of perseverance, it's a story of an individual that had hard knocks. You know, I don't like to compare the groups, but Native Americans have had it tough. If you look at their stats compared to African American, their stats are actually a lot worse than African American and Latinos in this country. And so his story is inspiring in the sense that you may have an individual that is having difficult times and not knowing how they're going to get through college or not knowing if college is for them or not knowing if they can be a tradesperson through GRCC and hear a story like his, because more than likely his story is probably worse than yours. Because just listening to what happened to him as a young man, so it was absolutely fascinating. So we've had that for 5 years. I'm very proud of this. We get, so we get Amway and Herman Miller and Steelcase and Varnum and Gordon Food Service, all these great companies coming together to prove that, hey, Grand Rapids is a place that celebrates diversity, and we want you individuals to be here. So it's always great to have that conference. And so, as I'm beginning to wrap this up, Cascade Engineering is a company that believes that as a business, one of our jobs is to break down barriers, right? And so these are all barriers to employment. It could be transportation, it could be abuse, it could be literacy, it could be age, it could be all a billion different things. So as an organization, what are we or what are you doing to make sure that you can help break down those barriers so that what individuals have opportunities? We believe that breaking down barriers allows people to be successful, right? And that's a great, great story. It's a great, great thing for business to be able to do that, because business, from the business perspective, we believe that business can do as much as, nonprofits or government, whatever. We can do these things. We can have a huge impact in this world, and we want to do that. And so, in wrapping up, I like to tell you about the two Kenyattas, right? So before I came to Cascade, there was always these two Kenyattas. There was a Kenyatta on the left there that moved to Honduras and worked in an orphanage, that started the Boy Scout troop, that was very active in my church. I'm very active in my community, right? And that was a non-working Kenyatta, right? In my mind, those are two separate things, right? They weren't connected at all. And on the right-hand side, that's the attorney Kenyatta that came to work and maximize profit for his employer, right? My job was to come to work and make as much money and to fix their problems and resolve their issues and make sure that everything that needed to happen for the organization happened, right? But since coming to Cascade, there's not two Kenyattas, there can be one Kenyatta. That's the best thing about working for this organization, that I'm having a conversation with you about, this is about business, but we're talking about social issues, right? When I went to out in the woods in Muskegon with the boys, and I didn't have to use my vacation to do that, right? Because the company supports that activity. I never use all my vacation anyway, so I got to work on that. The company supports that, right? And so all the things that having conversations in the schools, right? Coming into schools and having conversations, working with nonprofits, going down to Hartside and doing work down there is something that the organization, that Cascade Engineering supports, right? So I am engaged. I get to bring my full self to work. I was at University of Michigan recently. I was doing some recruiting there. And when I went to Michigan, people asked me two things. When you got a job, they said, what city are you going to and how much are you making, right? Those are the only things that mattered, right? Now I'm sitting across from a 22-year-old and she's asking me, what do we do in the community, right? So the world is changing, right? And now in order to be an effective employer, you have to be able to contribute to your community, because this next generation is asking tough questions like that. Not just how much am I going to get in my bonus this year, but flexibility in my work schedule. Right? Describe your work-life balance. Describe how I can continue to contribute to my community. And employers that don't have those answers in the future won't be able to recruit the best talent. So by being able to be the one Kenyatta, bringing my full self to work, they get all of my discretionary effort, right? I come home exhausted. Every once in a while, Tracy finds me on the couch just knocked out, right? I've given it all I can give at work because I want to, right? Because I love it, because I'm able to fulfill myself by going to work. So with that, I thank you very much for this conversation, and I want to take any questions that you may have. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Are there any specific requirements for being an anti-racist organization? It sounded like it was some organized.
Yes, there's two different things. There's a partnership for racism-free community, and they actually will audit you. And so you go through a two-day, is it a two-day audit, Sharon? You go through a specific audit, and they will ask you a series of questions. They'll talk to your employees and see how you handle issues of race. So being an anti-racism organization itself is actually separate from that. We try to be both those things, but there is, and actually this group is out of Grand Rapids. So actually Grand Rapids is leading this work, and they can do that. And so there are many companies that in the region that have been audited and have passed. And so if you go to their website, you can get all the information on that. Yes, sir.
During your presentation, I'm curious, in the workplace, has there been people that have come out with really polarized views in your company that maybe don't fit with the culture in the company?
Yeah. Sometimes you get polarized views, and that's why I want to make I want to make clear that this is not love and puppies all the time, right? There are some conflicts. There are people who disagree with certain things. They're saying that, for example, we had an individual that would wear a Confederate flag, and so we had a conversation with him where we asked him, do you know this is having this response to someone? He said, I have a right to wear that. I most definitely have a right to wear this. But then he talked to some people and said, this is what this is telling me. This is what this means to me. And he says, okay, I wasn't trying to do that, right? Because once again, he didn't have an appreciation for what this meant to other people. And once he heard what it meant to other people, he says, okay, I get it. I'm not necessarily buying it all, but I get that's how I don't want you to see me this way, because I know that's not what I'm saying. But because people are seeing me this way, I'm going to stop wearing this Confederate bandana, right? So we do have some difficult situations. We do have some conversations about it. Often what it is that people say or do things probably unconsciously, right? So you don't have many people getting called the N-word, or you don't have many people, but you do get cliques. And they'll say, hey, this clique, is full of Latinos or full of whites or full of blacks, and they don't like another clique. And it's a racially diverse, different group, and there's conflict. And we have to break those barriers down, saying, why is it that this group is not getting along with this group, and have those conversations. And so once again, it's the fear of not addressing the elephant in the room and saying, hey, is race part of this, or is it language, right? Sometimes we get some concerns with, well, they're speaking Spanish, and they must be talking about me, right? And so we have those conversations. And I've always said, you know what, if they want to speak Spanish, they can speak Spanish. Right? I mean, that should be their right. They shouldn't have to not speak Spanish to make me feel comfortable. I speak Spanish, by the way, so I don't really care. But nevertheless, but we do have those concerns and conflicts. So what I want to relay is that there are difficult situations. There are some tough conversations that we do have, and not all of them end up perfect. But once again, having that conversation makes it worthwhile for us. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so we've got the ones that we publish in the TBL, and then we've got 100 other ones because we track almost everything at Cascade Engineering. The biggest one is probably retention. That's a major one for us. We look at compa ratios, where people are getting paid compared to market. Make sure that we're always paying people at market. We don't want to be under market. We look at that one. That's sort of a financial person one as well. We look at healthcare costs. We look at people who smoke. We look at all these stats about our healthcare. So we look at a lot of things that affect people's health, both physically and mentally, and track those and discuss those with our employees. Also, another big one is safety. One of our goals is to have 0 incidents. And so we're not there yet, but we're moving toward that direction. We spend a lot of time focusing on what you need to do to be safe. We're a manufacturer, so we're one of those places that if you're not safe, you could actually die, right? Very dangerous. In fact, 2 weeks ago, there was a death in a plastic injection molding company in the state, and that's just something that's not acceptable to us. We spent a lot of time focusing on that. Yes?
Can you speak a little bit about the size of the team that you have that help with a lot of these? I mean, I'm assuming it's not just one person.
Oh, yeah.
Sharon
Yeah.
helps a lot, but just kind of help put in perspective the buy-in from the organization to support the initiatives. Yeah,
so I like to say we have this strong team, but we've got these probably smaller teams throughout the organization. And so about, 2 years ago, there was this great video that talked about diversity at Cascade Engineering. And, people came to me and said, hey, you guys did this great video. And I loved it. I was like, ooh, unfortunately, that was just done by employees, right? So we have a lot of individuals to the organization that have really bought into these concepts and support them. And we allow individuals to be creative, but we don't necessarily direct everything. So Sharon is the leader of the Diversity Coordinating Council. That's about, how many people on that? 20 people on that, and they have a budget, a relatively small budget that they do a lot of activities for or do with. But throughout the organization, we have other groups of people that just get together and do different things to support diversity. We have a woman that for every February, she throws this party in our learning center where she just does it herself because she thinks it's important. Her whole plant come, she feeds them. So we feed people, they will come. But But it's a celebration on African American history. We have Latino groups, we've got veteran groups that celebrate these different things. So I'd like to say that it's really centralized. It's really not centralized. And so the groups come together whenever they feel it's appropriate and get stuff done. Yes.
Having worked together in the past, a lot of my former students were returning citizens, and one of the things that we found was that soft skills was a major problem.
Yes.
I know you addressed that.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the things that we do when a person gets hired at Cascade Engineering is they've got 20 hours of orientation. And a lot of that is on soft skills. So a person knows how to effectively communicate. So often, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? And if you don't appreciate that there's different ways to speak to people and understanding what they are. Also, there's something called DISC, where you determine what type of personality you have and just understanding what type of personality you have. I'm a strong D, right? So I like short, quick answers, right? And so people who know that about me give me information in that way. Where if I know that you're a C, I know that you're analytical, so I'm gonna give you information in a different way. And so that helps us communicate. If I understand what style you are, it allows us to communicate better. So we provide that to employees as well. But a lot of training, our supervisors go through trainings every year to make sure they understand those issues. Leadership training, we do just tons. We have a department that does a ton of things that focuses on just making sure your 5-7 habits, making sure that you effectively treat people with dignity and respect. Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Brame.
Hey, Marta, how you doing? Yes.
I have a two-part question.
Uh-oh.
My first question is, how did you get such a cool cat and work me by that? And my second question is real, and that is, how are you sharing your lessons learned for especially the citizens, longer career,
Yeah.
with other organizations? Is there a forum, or is it more informal sharing?
Yeah, with 32.2, we're actually going out and we're trying to recruit other companies. I know Rockford Construction is here somewhere. They actually had a meeting with them. They say, hey, how can we be part of that? And so having these conversations with other companies, and they say, hey, how do you do it? What are you doing? We have those conversations, and they're able to decide whether they want to do it or not. One thing about Cascade Engineering is that we've always been sort of insular. She's a former Cascade Engineering person, by the way, so she knows a lot about us. We've always been sort of insular, and we've always sort of done things for ourselves and not worried about the rest of how the rest of the world is doing it. That's one thing that we've changed. And actually, through our B certification, that's one of the things that made us look at ourselves, because we look at a lot of our rules and policies. We don't discuss these. We didn't discuss these things with our supply chains. We didn't necessarily discuss them with our other partners, and now we do. And we're not telling them to do anything, but we're saying, hey, if you guys want to learn about this, this is an opportunity for you to come and talk about that. Thank you, Marta. You know what? I still have that hat, believe it or not. My nephews wear it, so yeah, way back in Honduras. Actually, it's from Guatemala, so that's why I speak Spanish. I used to live in Honduras, so. Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yes, John.
Flip up the next slide so we can see your beautiful family.
Oh, okay, yeah. See, John put the slides together, so. Yeah, there it is. I forgot about that. And so, just having.
Three Kenyattas.
Yeah, just having, being I'm one of those guys that I got married when I was 35, right? And so I have small children, and they're very, very fortunate that they've got the mellow Kenyatta, not the 25-year-old Kenyatta as a father. So, and just often, I probably worry more about my son than I do my daughter because of what's going on in our community. He's a good kid. He's smart. He's bright, and I want him to have a great future. And coming out of the woods last week, I'm thinking, "Whoa, hopefully this is not the day where it all changes, right?" And I was talking to a friend of mine down the street, and I was thinking, I hope that we don't look back at the '80s and say that was the best time, peak, right? And so I'm just hoping that we've got a lot to look forward to in the future, and that we're going to have to be able to get to some of these issues and have a way to constructively discuss them and be able to move ahead. Yeah, they're now 7 and 9, so that was a picture about a year ago, so they're 10. 10, yes, that's right. Don't tell him I said that. His birthday was July 2nd, so yeah. Yep.
You mentioned some of your geographical diversity.
Yes.
For your locations
Yes.
for your business.
Yes.
Is there a way that you work on a lot of these different programs based on either differences of the types of facilities that you have, or business segments,
Yes.
and locations?
Yes, for example, in Florida and Texas, the majority of our population is Latino, of the hourly workers. And so, you know, a lot of the stuff in Grand Rapids is based upon a black-white divide. But when we're looking at issues in Brownsville, Texas, it's a different issue. And so we have to get input from them about what are the issues related to race that are important to you? What are the issues that are important to you as far as language, et cetera? And so we have to have each facility do that. The toughest issue was, you know, going to Budapest and trying to do some of these things. And they don't have the diversity that we have here, so the issues aren't as relevant. And they often wonder, why are we talking about these things? But nevertheless, you have to be able to have conversations based upon the population that you do have. So yes, our conversations are very different depending on where we are.
Any last questions for Kenyatta?
You have a lot of employees from different backgrounds.
Yes.
In terms of financials. So how much of your, this is a bias question, that's what I do. How much of your prepping them for work, prepping them for their basic finances, and how getting this job is going to be important to stay. Do you do part of that?
Yes. Yes. So at Cascade Engineering, we have a progression process called PFC. And so you become an A, and then you become a B, and become a C, and you get raises as you go up. And so one of the things that you're required to do in order to get that first jump is take financial literacy. So we do some training ourselves. We teach them about these issues of understanding your finances and understanding budgets and saving, et cetera, et cetera. And so we do a lot of training on that. You know, we're very fortunate in the sense that we pay weekly. One of very few companies that do that, and you know, we can save a lot of money by not doing that, but it allows people to better. We find it allows people to better manage their money because they're getting paid weekly rather than trying to do a two-week jump. And so that's one of the things that we also do. But we're very aware of that concern. Thank you very much.